week, Science 9. Here is going to be our first of 2 videos for this week, just to help you out with the assignment and give us a good head start on understanding, for this video, DNA structure and function. So today during this video we are going to discuss first of all an analogy. So analogy is a comparison to allow us to understand DNA in a way that maybe we're more familiar with. We're also going to discuss where we find DNA, what does it look like, what is a chromosome, what is the function of DNA, what does it do, and finally what is a gene. So we'll have all these understood by the end of the lesson. So first thing is, there's a lot of different parts. You've seen some of these. I saw looking at your assignments last week for all of you, you were able to mention a lot of these different parts that are in the cell structure. And so all these parts are very important, but there's 2 that are the most important for Science 10 and for Science 9. And those are, of course, the nucleus and the ribosomes. So the nucleus is what contains the DNA. So if you look on this diagram here, this part here coated in a membrane, this is the nucleus. And also if you look inside, you'll find that there is this squiggly part in here, this squiggly line that's filling up this. So this is our DNA. This long stranded molecule is our DNA, and that's what's contained in the nucleus. And we also have ribosomes, and ribosomes are they use DNA. So DNA contains information, and ribosomes use that DNA and use that information that's contained in the DNA to make proteins. And we're going to see later in the video what those proteins are used for. Okay, so those are the 2 that we're going to be mainly focusing on today, nucleus and ribosomes. So, what is DNA? I'm sure we've all heard the term before. It does have a long scientific name. That's this one right here, which is pronounced deoxyribonucleic acid. So deoxyribonucleic acid, these belong to a family of nucleic acids, and this just happens to be one specific type of nucleic acids, or acids that are found in molecules. It is a molecule itself, but it's a very, very big molecule, so the size of which is really hard to even fathom. And just as another reminder, going back to chemistry, a molecule is just atoms that are bonded together. So for example, if we have a hydrogen atom and a hydrogen atom and an oxygen atom, here are 3 atoms, but if we bond them together, then what we have here is one molecule. And of course this is one molecule that's made up of the 3 atoms. So 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, and specifically this would be a water molecule, as opposed to the 3 atoms that we have on the left-hand side. So it's just when we bond atoms together. This is, just to give you an example, this is a big molecule. This is sort of what DNA is going to look like. Now this is a model of DNA, and in this model here, these have, each of these would represent a different type of atom. So these red ones here would be oxygen, the white ones here would be phosphorus, and you can see that this single area here is made up of a huge number of these atoms. To give you a scale, so these lines here, something called base pairs, we'll get into that a bit later. So in a single piece of DNA, there might be essentially with one of these pieces here, there might be somewhere on the order of 300 million of these pairs here, of these lines here. Something like 300 million in the larger one, maybe 100 million in some of the smaller ones. In total, we have around 3 billion of these base pairs. 3 billion of these lines divided amongst all of our DNA. Okay, now this is another way that we can look at a piece of DNA. So this model here, if we were going to draw this model out with all of the balls representing individual atoms, this would obviously be very complex to try and indicate the shape of DNA. So we can see this a bit more clearly if we draw the DNA as this model is done below. So if you look at the model above here, you'll see that there's this line of red and white molecules, and this one here as well. So this right here, these twisting lines, we call these helixes, can be compared, or essentially are the same as this diagram here, but obviously this bottom diagram allows you to see the shape of these a bit different. And also if we look at these lines going across here, so this line, etc., these would represent these portions right here, which we call base pairs. So to give you an idea of the scale of a DNA molecule might have somewhere between 100 to 300 million of these base pairs in a single DNA strand. So that's, instead of having just this many, essentially we can see that this is just a very small portion of a larger DNA molecule. This is just a tiny chunk out of the grand scheme of things. Because you would have, instead of seeing here, we can see maybe 20 base pairs, there'd be about 10 million times that amount in a full-length DNA. Now this shape here, you can, if you want to be able to picture this in 3D, you can kind of think of this as a ladder. So imagine you have a ladder and these are the rungs of the ladder going this way. Now imagine if you took one person holding the top and one person holding the bottom, and then you just twisted them up. So one of the person at the top, for example, twists the ladder and you get this kind of twisty ladder shape. And this twisty ladder shape does have an official name. It's called a double helix. So that's the official name of this DNA shape here, is a double helix. Okay, and again, super long. We're talking, instead of just these pieces here we can see 6 different pairs. Well, you're looking somewhere on the range of 100 to 300 million pairs, depending on which chromosome we're looking at. And we'll get into that in just a quick moment. So this is what deoxyribonucleic, or DNA, looks like. It's a very, very, very long strand. Now, I'm not sure if any of you at home have thread of your own. So you can see this is kind of like a very long thread. And if you have thread at home, maybe you're into sewing or cross stitch or any kind of hobby to do with thread in any way, maybe someone in your family does, I'm guessing that they wouldn't, or you wouldn't, just store your thread or store your yarn in a big tangly mess in a drawer. No, that wouldn't be a very efficient way of trying to get anything done. You'd have knots, it would get torn, etc. That'd be a really terrible way of storing your string or your yarn. And so if you have yarn, for example, you will twist that up into a tight ball. So it's going to be efficient to kind of unwrap it and rewrap it as you need it. DNA is no different than that. So the DNA isn't just held as one long string. It's going to be wrapped up into smaller and smaller sections. Those sections themselves get wrapped up. Those sections themselves get wrapped up. So it's a kind of a meta way of looking at it. You twist this, the DNA itself is twisted to form smaller parts. Those twists are formed to form larger parts, etc., etc. And when you gather all these together, you're eventually going to have what's called a chromosome. So one chromosome is essentially one long string of DNA. That is what one chromosome is. And in the human genome, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. So this picture here of an X, this is actually 2 chromosomes. So they're joined in the middle, but this is actually 2 separate chromosomes to make one essentially we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. If you've heard of the website 23andMe, that's looking at our entire genetic history. So what that means, if we have 23 pairs, it means that we have 46 chromosomes. Sorry, I just put it on 2 lines there. So we have 46 chromosomes, which essentially means 46 long DNA molecules. And that's in the nucleus of every single cell. We have 46 of these really long DNA molecules, which means we have 46 chromosomes, which means we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, or 23 pairs of these very long DNA molecules. Okay, so what is DNA for? We've talked about what it is, we've talked about how it's organized. Well, DNA contains information in sections, and these sections of important DNA are called genes. And these genes code for proteins. Now, proteins you've heard probably with respect to eating. So we want to make, you'll have proteins as part of your diet. Some people eat meat for that. Some people eat a well-balanced vegetarian diet to receive all of their proteins, or vegetarian or vegan diet, whatever suits you as long as you're healthy. So proteins are these molecules. They are part of the cells. They're used to build parts of the cells. They also move things around that your body needs, so they transfer nutrients from one part of the cell to another, and they also digest nutrients. So they have a number of different functions, and these are just a few examples here. So if you were to look at one piece of DNA, so remember this is one long strand of DNA which makes up a chromosome, and a gene is just one section of that. So maybe, for example, this gene is what helps determine your eye color. And maybe down here there's another gene that tells you what or helps to decide what your hair color is going to be. So each of these little sections, or each of these little genes, will give one specific instruction. Now, an analogy that's commonly used when we're talking about chromosomes is we would say that a chromosome is like a cookbook. So you can see that in this one long strand of chromosomes, you're going to have a bunch of different genes in here. So this is like one cookbook, and you can see in this one cookbook, you're going to have a lot of different recipes, just like a normal cookbook. So if a cookbook is DNA, or a cookbook is a chromosome, then the individual genes, the individual sections, these would be like recipes within the cookbook. And lastly, these recipes will code for specific functions. So they'll code for specific, if it's a recipe, it'll make specific food. If it's a gene, it's going to make specific proteins that have specific functions. So this whole piece again would be like a cookbook. This would be like a recipe within that cookbook, and it's going to create a specific protein. Maybe it's the protein that makes your eyes have a specific color. So these proteins that have specific functions to them. These are a list of the types of proteins. You do not need to know these for Science 9 or Science 10, although you will need to know some of them if you were to take biology 11 or 12. So some of these would be more important in your senior years, but if you're interested, you can certainly pause it and take a look. Pause the video and take a look, or we can carry on. So, genes and traits. So we know that genes code for proteins, and proteins work together to give us traits. So when I said that this gene codes for eye color, there's very few things in your DNA that are so simple. So we're giving us a bit of an oversimplified picture. So what I mean by that is there's not one specific gene that's going to say Mr. Wellsby is 6'2". There's not going to be one specific gene in one specific chromosome that's really going to tell us that. So often there's going to be a bunch of different genes working together, making proteins, and a lot of those together will give us our overall traits. So the fact that I'm 6'2" or 6'3" is nothing to do with one specific gene, but it's a combination of a number of different genes which are producing a number of different proteins which tell my cells to work in a specific way. And because of sexual reproduction, we are diverse in our traits. So some of you may be able to roll your tongues and some of you may not be able to roll your tongues. That is a trait. Having a widow's peak, this part of the hair up here, that is a trait. Some people have it, some people don't. Some people have attached earlobes. I have a hitchhiker's thumb where I can bend my thumb quite far backwards. Do you have hairy knuckles? That is a trait. Do you have freckles or the shape of your feet? Things like that. So these are all traits that we have, and our traits are different because of sexual reproduction, because we get some of our traits from mom and some of our traits from dad. Biologically, our biological mother, biological father, and those traits are based on different proteins working together, and the different proteins are produced by the genes. So just to give you a whole picture of how that runs down. Okay, so takeaway from this video. So where is DNA located? Well, first of all, DNA is located in our nucleus. And what does it look like? It is the double helix shape, which is the twisty or twisted ladder. What is DNA for? Well, DNA is for storing information, which we call our genes. And these go, so essentially DNA is for storing information, storing our genes, and then we can see here, so chromosomes are long DNA molecules, and genes are the bits of information, and these, as we were saying here, genes create proteins, and proteins work together to produce traits. Okay, well, I hope you found this video useful. We are going to have one more video when we look further down on this sheet. So now at this point you can answer these 5 questions, and if you want to continue with the second video, you can do that right after these 5 questions are done, or take a break and divide the work up throughout the week as you see fit, as you've timetabled yourself. So this is the first of 2 videos. I hope you've enjoyed it and learned something.